to my pre-trip inspection. I'm going to start down my passenger side. I'm looking for any leans, leaks, or visible damage. I'm looking underneath the truck for any visible leaks. I'm looking down my driver's side for any leans, leaks, or visible damage. Go up to my marker lights. I want to make sure they are properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. They are clean, the proper color of amber. Go down to my headlights and my turn signals. I want to make sure that they are properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. They are clean, the proper color of amber. They handle my left and my right turn signals, my four-way flashers, and my high and low beams. At this point, I'm going to open up the truck. Go to my passenger side engine compartment. I'm going to look at all my visible lines and all my visible hoses. I want to make sure that they're all properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. They are not leaking. I'm going to go to my coolant reservoir. I want to make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking, and it's filled to the proper level. I'm going to go down to my water pump, which is properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. My water pump is belt driven. I want to make sure that my belt is properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not cut, cracked, or frayed, and no more than 3/4 of an inch of play on it. I'm going to go to my driver's side compartment. Again, I'm going to start with all my visible lines and all my visible hoses. I want to make sure that they are all properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. They are not leaking. I'm going to go to my windshield washer fluid reservoir, make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. It's filled to the proper level. I'm going to go to my air compressor. You might want to get a little closer for this one. My air compressor is properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. It is gear driven. I'm going to go to my reservoir, my power steering reservoir. I want to make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. I'm going to pull the dipstick out, wipe it off, reinsert it, pull it back out, get a reading, and act accordingly to it. My power steering reservoir hose goes down to my power steering pump, which is back here. You can't see it. I want to make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. My power steering pump is belt driven. I want to make sure that it is properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not cracked or frayed, and no more than 3/4 of an inch of playing on it. I've got my engine oil dipstick. I want to make sure it's both of these are properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, and not leaking. I'm going to pull the dipstick out. I'm going to reinsert it. I'm going to pull it back out, get a reading, act accordingly to it. I got my alternator. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. I got my alternator wires. Make sure that they're properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. My alternator is belt driven. I want to make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not cut, cracked, or frayed, no more than 3/4 of an inch of playing on it. I've got my steering gearbox. I want to make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking, and all my nuts and bolts are in place and tight. I'm going to go to my steering linkage. My pitman arm, my drag link, and my tie rod. All three properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. No excessive wear or play on my bushings, and all my castle nuts and cotter pins are in place. Then I'm going to go to my suspension. My leaf spring hangers, my leaf springs, and my U-bolts. Make sure all of them are properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, not bent, dent, broken, shifted, or missing, and that all of my nuts and bolts are in place and tight, and no excessive wear on any of my bushings. I've got my shock and my shock mounts. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It is not leaking, and no excessive wear on my bushings. I've got my ABS line, my brake line, my brake chamber, my slack adjuster, and my push rod. All of it properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. My slack adjuster has a clamp that is, my brake chamber has a clamp that's securely fastened around it. My slack adjuster is at a 90-degree angle, and there's no more than 1 inch of play when my brakes are released. And all of my cotter pins are in place. I've got my inner brake drum lining. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's free of oil and grease, and there's a minimum of 1/4 inch of brake pad left on the brake pad. I've got my inner and outer rim. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's free of unauthorized welds. My lug nuts, properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. They're all tight. My hub seal, make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. Then I'm going to go to my tire. My inflation, condition, and depth. I'm going to go to my inflation. I'm going to put a gauge on it. Get a reading act accordingly. Make sure the valve stem itself is not properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. There's no abrasion and bumps and cuts on the tire. There's even tread wear on the tire. And there's at least 4/32 of tread depth on the tire itself. Test B. I'm going to start with the mirror. I want to make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's clean, just me as the driver. I've got my door. It's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. I'm going to open my door. I'm going to check my latches and my hinges. My other latch right here. Make sure it's all properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. I've got a seal right here. I want to make sure that seal is not cut, cracked, or frayed, so when I shut my door, it shuts and seals properly. I've got my steps. Make sure they're properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, free of foreign objects. I've got my side cab light. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's clean, the proper color amber. Handles my left, my right turn signals, my four-way flashers. I got my depth and my fuel tank. Make sure they're both properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. They're not leaking. And on both the depth and the fuel cap, there's a seal on the inside. I want to make sure it's not cut, cracked, or frayed, so when I close my cap, it shuts and seals properly. Up here, I don't have DOT tape, but I should. So my DOT tape and my utility light. Make sure that they're both properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. They're clean, proper color clear. I got my exhaust. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. If it were to be leaking, I would have black soot around the clamps. I've got my catwalk and my steps. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's free of foreign objects. Inside here, I've got my drive shaft and my U-joints. Drive shaft and U-joints. I want to make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. Free of foreign objects and no excessive wear. My frame and my cross frame, make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, and free of unauthorized welds. I got my splash guard. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. And then inside of here, I've got my 4 parts of suspension. So I'm going to start with my leaf spring hangers, and my U-bolts. Make sure all 3 are properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. Not bent, dent, broken, shifted, or missing. And no excessive wear on the hangers. My shock and shock mounts, properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. And no excessive wear on my bushings. My torque arm, which is right there. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, free of excessive wear and play on my bushings. And then back over here, I'm going to have my airbags. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, no abrasion, bumps, or cuts. And it's not leaking. Then I'm going to go back to my brake system. I'm going to go to my brake chamber, my ABS line, my brake line, my slack adjuster, and my push rod. Make sure all of it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. It's the brake chamber is clamped. It's securely fastened around the brake chamber. Slack adjuster is at a 90-degree angle. There's no more than 1 inch of play in the push rod when the brakes are released. Then I got my inner and outer brake drums. Make sure it's all properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. There's a minimum of 1/4 inch of brake lining left on it, and it's free of oil and grease. Then I got my inner and outer rims. Make sure it's properly mounted secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's free of unauthorized welds. I got my lug nuts Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not crack, damaged, loose. They're all tight. I've got my axle seal. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not crack, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. Then I'm gonna go to my tires. ICD, inflation, condition, and depth. I'll put a tire gauge on my valve stem, get a reading, act accordingly, make sure the valve stem is properly mounted, secure, not crack, damaged, loose, it's not leaking. My tire itself, there's no abrasion, bumps, and cut. There's even tread wear on the tire itself, and there's a minimum of 430 seconds of tread depth on the tire. These are dual tires, so I got a spacer in the middle. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not crack, damaged, loose. It's free of foreign objects, and the tire's not touching. Back here, I've got a mud flap. I want to make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not crack, damaged, loose. I got DOT tape back here, which is properly mounted, secure, not crack, damaged, loose. It's clean. And then my back bank of lights, properly mounted, secure, not crack, damaged, loose. It's clean, the proper color red and white. What it handles is my brake, my service brake, emergency brake, parking brake, left and right turn signals, and my four-way flashes, and my reverse light for the white. Alright, this is my coupling one. These are my lines and hoses. I want to make sure they're properly mounted, secure, not crack, damaged, loose, and not leaking. I'm going to follow them all the way over to my trailer, to my glad hands. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not crack, damaged, loose, it's not leaking. There's a seal inside of my glad hands. I want to make sure it's not cut, cracked, or frayed, so it seals properly. And then all my lines and hoses are securely fastened above my catwalk. Coupling two, I've got an apron and a kingpin. I want to make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, not bent, and broken. I got my fifth wheel and my fifth wheel release handle. There's a safety chain and my locking jaws. Make sure it's all properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. My locking jaws are secured around the shank of my kingpin. My locking pins on my fifth wheel platform are in locked position. My handle's in its locked position. Everything, and there's no gap between the fifth wheel and the apron, and the fifth wheel is properly greased. Then I want to make sure that there's a sufficient amount of space between the tractor frame and the landing gear. Alright, my seat test. I'm going to look at my header board. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. There's no visible holes or damage. Up top, my marker lights. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's clean, the proper color amber. All my rivets are in place. Right up underneath here, I've got some more lines and hoses. I want to make sure that they're all properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. They're not leaking. Back here, I'm going to look at my frame, my cross frame, make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, no illegal welds. I've got my floor, make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. All my bolts are in place. My DOT tape, make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. As I'm looking down the side of my trailer, I want to make sure I don't see any visible damage, no visible holes. Then I've got my landing gear and my feet and my crank handle. Make sure it's all properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. Crank handle is secured in its bracket, and my feet are fully raised up off the floor. Keep walking back here. Mid-trailer marker light. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's clean, the proper color amber. Handles my left and my right turn signals and my four-way flashers. I'm gonna keep on walking back here. I've got my lines and hoses up underneath the trailer. I want to make sure that they're all properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. They're not leaking, secured fully off the ground. Back here, I've got my release handle and my locking pins. Make sure they're both properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. The handle is secured inside of its bracket, and my locking pins are locked. Then back here, again, the same thing that I'm going to do up there. All four parts of my suspension. I got my leaf spring, the leaf spring hangers, and my U-bolts. Make sure all properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. Not bent, dent, broken, shifted, or missing. No excessive wear on the bushings. I got my shocks and shock mounts. Make sure they're properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. There's no excessive wear on my bushings. I've got my torque arm. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. No excessive wear on my bushings. Then I got my airbags. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. No abrasion, bumps, and cuts. Make sure it's not cut, cracked, or frayed, and it's not leaking. And back here again, I'm going to do all my brakes. I'm going to do my brake line, my ABS line, brake chamber, slack adjuster, push rod. Make sure it's all properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. Brake chamber clamp is securely fastened. Slack adjuster is at a 90-degree angle. No more than 1 inch of play on my push rod when my brake's released. Then I got my inner brake drum and lining. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. There's a minimum of 1/4 inch of lining left of my brake pad. Make sure it's free of oil and grease. I got my inner and outer rims properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, free of unauthorized welds. My lug nuts, make sure they're properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. All the nuts are tight. If they were to be loose, I'd see rust around the inside. Axle seal, make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. Then I'm going to go to my tire, my ICD. I'm going to start with my valve stem, make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. I'm going to put the tire gauge on it, get a rating, act accordingly to it. The tire itself, there's no abrasion, bumps, and cuts on it. Even tread wear, and at least a minimum of 30 seconds of tread depth on the tire. Again, these are dual tires. I got spaces in the middle. I want to make sure the tires aren't touching, and it's free of foreign objects. Back here, I've got my mud flap. Make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. Door hanger, properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. ABS light, properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not the proper color amber. If that light comes on, there's something wrong with the ABS system, just pull over at the next stop, get it checked. And there's instructions right here if you want to see it. Alright, back of the trailer, I'm going to start from the very top. Clearance lights, properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, clean, proper color red. Back vehicle lights, properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, and clean, the proper color red. The handle my left and right turn signals, my four-way flashers, my emergency service and parking brakes. Got my door. My door hinges, properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose, all my nuts are tight. My door handle, my latch bar, make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It latches from the bottom to the top. My door seal, not cut, cracked, or frayed, so my door shuts properly. I got my door ties, make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. DOT tape, properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. Whoop, properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. Start my in-cab pre-trip. I'm going to check my safety belt. My seat belt, I'll make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not cut, cracked, or frayed. It latches and unlatches properly. I'm going to relatch it, tighten it up. I've got my fuse box right here. I've got all my spare fuses down here, or there's a glove box, just put extra fuses there. I've got my 3 triangles behind the seat. I want to make sure they're all proper working condition. All 3 are there. They're all clean. I've got a fire extinguisher back here. I want to make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's not leaking. It's fully charged. 5 pounds BC rated, 10 pounds for your hazmat. Now I'm going to do my safety start. Make sure the truck is in neutral. Start up the truck. Making sure my selector switch is down. Slowly let off the clutch. My ABS light did come on and off. My voltmeter is between 12 and 14 volts. My oil pressure is rising, proper pressure. My temperature gauge is not overheating. My air tanks, my front and my rear, they're rising up. I want them to be between 120 and 140 psi. I'm going to start with my mirror, make sure it's properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damaged, loose. It's clean, just to me, the driver. And at this point, you're going to look at the examiner and just say, hey, I'm going to do my indicator bars and my lights and stuff like that. He'll get outside of the truck. So first you're going to do it inside. You're going to do your high beams and your low beams. You want to make sure that they're properly working on the bar here, so I get a blue light, a left turn signal, a right turn signal, my four-way flashers, my city horn, my air horn. I've got my windshield, make sure it's properly mounted, secure, no crack, damage, loose. It's free of anything obstructing my view. My seal around the windshield is not cut, cracked, or frayed, and sealed properly. My windshield wiper blades and my windshield wipers are properly mounted, secure, not cracked, damage, loose. The blades are not cut, cracked, or frayed. So when I turn them on, they wipe evenly. The windshield washer fluid sprays evenly on the windshield. I've got my heater, defrost. I want to make sure it's on up here, and I'm going to also check it down here. Other than that, we're going to do our tug test. I'm going to put the truck in first gear. I'm going to release my trailer brake, slowly release my clutch until I feel a tug. Alright, felt the tug. Pull my trailer, release my parking, slowly release my clutch, have it in first gear. I felt the tug. At that point, I'm going to put it into third gear, do my service brake, release both my brake and my tractor trailer brake, pull forward, truck didn't lean to the left or the right. I'm in good position. Put the truck back into first gear, shut the truck off, and now I'm going to do my PSI leakage test. So what I'm going to do is make sure that these are released. Both of them are in. I'm going to put my foot on the brake. I'm going to ask the examiner, do you mind timing me for 1 minute? The examiner will say, okay, go ahead. And after 1 minute, you're going to look at him and say, I didn't lose more than 4 PSI per minute on my leakage test. Now I'm going to do my warning light. It should be at 60 PSI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pump my brakes. My warning light came on at 60 PSI. And then I'm going to continue fanning my brakes until my brakes release. And it should be between 20 and 40 PSI. Make sure that when you shut the truck off, you turn the ignition back on. Alright, both my tractor and my trailer emergency parkings came on, and this completes my test.